The locals didn't just call it the Silent Mile, they called it God's blind spot. Sector 4 of the Blackwood National Forest wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. No birds sang there, no crickets chirped. The air itself felt thick and gelatinous, like breathing underwater. Arthur knew the reputation of the valley. He had heard the whispers in the town diner, the warnings from old hunters who refused to track deer past the ridgeline. But Arthur was a man of science, a researcher who dealt in data points, not ghost stories. He believed that every shadow could be explained by the angle of the sun and every fear by a spike in cortisol. He hiked into that dead valley to set up a grid of 12 motion-activated cameras. His goal wasn't to find monsters, it was to prove they didn't exist. He wanted to map the migration of mountain lions, to prove that the disappearances were just tragedies of terrain and weather, not the work of something ancient. He left the cameras there for 30 days, 30 days of battery life, 30 days of silent, unblinking observation while he sat warm and safe in his rented cabin 10 miles away. It was a perfect experiment, or so he told himself. When he returned to retrieve the SD cards, the forest felt hostile, not empty but cleared, as if everything living had fled from something it couldn't fight. The silence pressed against his eardrums, a physical weight that made him dizzy. He moved quickly from tree to tree, unstrapping the camouflage boxes with trembling fingers. He fought a wave of primal nausea that he couldn't explain. He didn't check the photos on the small screens in the field. He just wanted to get out. He sprinted back to the jeep, locking the doors before he even caught his breath. Back in the sterile, fluorescent safety of his workspace, Arthur tried to laugh at his own panic. He poured a cup of black coffee, the steam rising in the cold air of the cabin. He needed the logic of his computer screen to wash away the feeling of being watched. He sat down at his desk, surrounded by hard drives and maps. He inserted the first SD card into the reader. The laptop hummed, a comforting, mechanical sound. He opened the folder for Camera 01. Camera 01, the ridge. The screen filled with thumbnails. Arthur clicked through them rapidly. Wind moving a branch. A squirrel investigating the strap. A deer drinking at midnight. Standard, boring, safe. He relaxed. The tension from the hike began to dissolve into the rhythmic clicking of the mouse. He worked through the first 3 cameras. Nothing but nature doing what nature does. Surviving, eating, sleeping. Then he picked up the card for Camera 04. Camera 04 was located in the deepest part of the valley, a thicket of thorns and old-growth pine where the sun rarely touched the ground. Arthur remembered setting it up. He remembered the smell of ozone and rot that lingered there. He loaded the card. The folder opened. There were only 3 photos. Arthur frowned. In 30 days, a camera usually triggered hundreds of times. 3 photos meant the sensor was broken or the valley was truly dead. He clicked the first image. The timestamp was 03:14:22 a.m. The image was a monochrome nightmare. In the center of a dense, thorny thicket where no human could walk without a machete, stood a figure. It was a man. He wore a heavy coat, the kind you buy at any surplus store, but no backpack, no water, no gear. He was standing perfectly rigid, his arms pinned to his sides like a toy soldier. Arthur leaned closer to the screen, squinting. The trees around the figure were blurred by the wind, their branches streaks of grey in the long exposure. But the man was razor-sharp, unnaturally still. He hadn't moved a millimeter during the shutter speed. "Trespasser," Arthur muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. A poacher. In that terrain, without a flashlight? The image was pitch black. Only the infrared flash illuminated the figure. The man was standing in total darkness. Arthur clicked Next. Camera 05, the upper cliff. Arthur froze. Camera 05 wasn't near the thicket. It was 3 miles away, separated from camera AO4 by a vertical granite ravine that required climbing gear to traverse. He looked at the timestamp, 03:14:24 a.m. 2 seconds later. Arthur's brain stuttered. He did the math instinctively, desperate for an error. Maybe the clocks weren't synced. No. He had synced them all to the second via his laptop before deployment. 2 seconds. 3 miles. He looked at the figure in the photo. It was him. The same coat. The same rigid posture. The same impossible stillness. But in this photo, the angle was different. The camera was mounted higher, looking down from a tree. The figure was standing at the base of the cliff, looking up. He wasn't looking at the cliff face. He was looking at the camera. Arthur felt a cold prickle of sweat erupt on his forehead. The man's face was a blur of white pixels in the night vision, but the direction was unmistakable. He knew the camera was there. "It's 2 people," Arthur whispered to the empty cabin. "Twins, a prank, a coordinated prank." He was lying to himself, he knew it. The odds of 2 men wearing the exact same coat, standing in the exact same posture, in the middle of a restricted forest at 3 a.m. was 0. And then there was the stillness, the utter inhuman lack of motion. Arthur's hand hovered over the mouse. He didn't want to click next. He knew there was a third photo on the card. He knew, with a sick feeling in his gut, where camera 06 was. Camera 06 was the creek bed camera. It was another 2 miles east. He clicked. Timestamp 03:14:25 a.m. 1 second later. The image loaded. Arthur recoiled, pushing his chair back so hard it screeched against the wood floor. The figure wasn't in the distance anymore. He was inches from the lens. The face filled the frame, washed out and ghostly white by the infrared flash. The skin looked like plastic, smooth and poreless. The eyes were black pits that reflected no light, absorbing the infrared beam completely. And the mouth. The mouth was open, pressed against the plastic casing of the camera. The man was breathing on the lens. Arthur could see the condensation fogging the edges of the frame. He wasn't just passing by. He was interacting. He was tasting the machine. Arthur stared at the black eyes. They seemed to drill through the screen, through the pixels, into the room. He grabbed the notepad where he kept his coordinates. He needed to verify the locations. Maybe he labeled them wrong. Maybe camera 04 and 06 were right next to each other. He flipped the pages frantically. No, the GPS coordinates were correct. The distance was 5 miles total. Time elapsed 3 seconds. Arthur stood up and paced the small room. The cabin felt too open. The windows were dark squares of night reflecting the interior lights. He suddenly felt exposed. He walked over and pulled the curtains shut, his hands shaking. He went back to the computer. He had to look again. He zoomed in on the face in the third photo. The resolution was high. He could see the texture of the coat. He could see the moisture on the lips. And then he saw it, reflected in the black surface of the man's eye. It was a tiny, distorted reflection of the environment, but it wasn't the forest. Arthur zoomed in until the pixels began to break apart. The reflection showed a square light, a window, and inside the window, a silhouette of a man sitting at a desk. Arthur stopped breathing. That was impossible. The photo was taken 30 days ago. The reflection should show trees, the moon, darkness. Why did it show a lit window? Why did it show him? He looked at the timestamp again, 03:14:25 a.m. He looked at the clock on his laptop. It was 03:14 a.m. The date on the photo wasn't last month. It was today. Arthur grabbed the SD card reader. He hadn't looked at the date. He assumed it was the old data. But the camera wasn't connected to the internet. It couldn't transmit. Unless the photo wasn't coming from the SD card. The laptop screen flickered. The image of the man with the black eyes remained frozen, but the timestamp began to tick forward. 03:14:26. 03:14:27. It wasn't a photo. It was a live feed. Arthur spun around, staring at the front door of the cabin. Camera 06 wasn't in the creek bed. He had retrieved it. It was in his backpack. His backpack was sitting on the floor by the door. The camera was inside the bag. So what was looking at him? He looked back at the screen, the face pulled back slightly. The background wasn't the woods. It was the interior of his own backpack. The texture of the canvas was visible behind the head. The thing was inside the bag, inside the room, 10 feet away. Arthur stared at the backpack. It was a heavy green canvas bag, sitting slumped against the pine doorframe like a dead body. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It was just fabric and zippers. But on the laptop screen behind him, the feed was still live. The pale face with the black eyes was still there, the mouth opening and closing in a wet, silent rhythm against the lens. Arthur backed away from the desk, his back hitting the far wall. He couldn't take his eyes off the bag. It's a glitch, his mind screamed, desperate for logic. It's a loop, a cached video playing back. But the timestamp on the screen was still ticking. 03:15. 02 a.m. He needed a weapon. He reached blindly to his left, his fingers closing around the cold iron of the heavy fireplace poker. It felt real, solid, a tool of physics in a room that was rapidly abandoning the laws of reality. He raised it, his knuckles white. "Come out," Arthur rasped. His voice was thin, pathetic. The cabin absorbed the sound instantly. The wind outside had stopped. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the humming of the laptop fan, working hard to process the high-definition nightmare on the screen. He took a step toward the bag, then another. He extended the poker, poking the canvas. The bag yielded. It was soft, empty. There was no solid mass inside, no head, no body. Arthur frowned. He lowered the poker. He lunged forward, unzipping the main compartment in one violent motion. He ripped the bag open. Inside, nestled among coiled cables and spare batteries, was camera 06. It was facing upward. The lens cap was off. The red recording light was blinking steadily, a rhythmic crimson pulse in the shadows of the bag. But there was no face. The bag was empty. Arthur stared at the camera. If the camera was here and the bag was empty, what was on the screen? He turned slowly back to the desk. The laptop screen had changed. The face was no longer pressing against the lens. The figure had pulled back. The camera view on the screen was now showing a wide shot. It showed the interior of a room. This room. The angle was high, looking down from the corner of the ceiling. Arthur looked at the screen and saw the back of his own head. He saw himself standing there, holding the fireplace poker, staring at the laptop. Arthur froze. He didn't look up at the corner of the room. He couldn't. He stayed fixed on the screen, watching his own delayed reaction. In the video feed, the shadows in the corner of the ceiling began to detach. They weren't shadows. The darkness poured down the wall like thick black oil. It pooled on the floor behind the Arthur on the screen. The pool of darkness rose. It elongated. It formed legs, a torso, a head. It was the man from the photos, the man in the hiking coat. He was standing directly behind the real Arthur. Arthur watched on the screen as the figure raised a hand. The fingers were impossibly long, pale white spiders against the dark wood of the cabin. The figure on the screen leaned forward. It placed its chin on Arthur's shoulder. Arthur felt the cold. It wasn't a wind. It was a void of heat. A spot of absolute zero pressing against his neck, right where the image showed the face. He smelled it then. The ozone, the rot. The smell of a forest that had been dead for 1,000 years. "I found you," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the room. It came from the laptop speakers. And it was Arthur's own voice. Arthur spun around, swinging the poker with all his strength into the empty air behind him. The poker hit nothing. The momentum carried him off balance, and he fell, crashing into the desk. The laptop skidded off the edge, landing face up on the floor. Arthur scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the desk, gasping for air. "Where are you?" he screamed. He looked at the laptop screen on the floor. The feed had changed again. It was now a close-up of Arthur's face, but Arthur wasn't holding the camera. The laptop was on the floor. The angle was from above him, looking down. Arthur looked up. Clinging to the ceiling beams, limbs twisted at impossible angles like a broken spider, was the man. His head was rotated 180 degrees, hanging down, staring face to face with Arthur. The black eyes widened, the mouth opened, and the flash of the trail camera went off. The search party found the cabin 3 weeks later. It had snowed heavily, burying the jeep and the tracks leading to the door. The cabin was locked from the inside. The windows were intact. Inside, they found Arthur's equipment set up perfectly. The hard drives were catalogued. The coffee cup was moldy but unspilled. But Arthur was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no note. Just the laptop sitting open on the desk, the battery long dead. When the sheriff plugged it in and booted it up, he found the folder for Camera 06. There was only one video file. The sheriff clicked play. The video showed Arthur sitting at his desk, working. Then he stands up. He walks to the door. He opens it. He stands there for a moment, staring out into the dark, swirling snow. Then Arthur turns back to the camera. His eyes are entirely black, no whites, just pits. He smiles, a smile that stretches too wide, tearing the skin at the corners of his mouth. He waves at the lens, a stiff, mechanical wave. Then he walks out into the snow, leaving the door wide open. The video continues for 6 hours, just the empty room, the snow blowing in. And then, in the final second before the battery dies, a face appears from the darkness of the open door. It's Arthur. He looks at the camera. "We are still hungry," he whispers, and the screen goes black. Technology sees what we refuse to believe, but sometimes being watched is the only thing keeping you alive. If this story made you check the corners of your room, subscribe to Old World Whispers, join us in the dark, and tell me in the comments, do you trust the silence of the woods, or do you know what's listening? I'll be reading.